Hello everyone and welcome to the What You Need to Know About Tax Abatement Disclosures presentation. My name is Anthony St. George and I am an audit manager with Heinfeld Meach. Over the next couple of minutes we will be going over GASB 77 and the impact that it will have on your entity. The goal of this presentation is to provide insight over tax abatements as well as highlight a few key areas that should be considered as we near the first year of implementing this GASB standard. So as far as tax abatements go, the first thing to know is what is a tax abatement? A tax abatement is when the government reduces or abates the taxes the taxpayer otherwise would owe. The taxpayer in turn takes a specific action that contributes to the economic development or otherwise benefits the government or its citizens. So why would a government enter into a tax abatement agreement? Governments generally agree to abate or reduce the taxes of businesses and other taxpayers to promote economic development, job growth, redevelopment of blighted or underdeveloped areas, and other actions that are beneficial to the government or its citizen. So how are these agreements formed? Typically there's a written agreement between the government and a corporation or user of the potential taxable property. As part of these agreements there are sometimes covenants and other terms that both parties must agree to in the agreement. As far as current guidance on tax abatements, there's not much. There are no universal requirements on even disclosing such agreements. As these governments are not public or disclosed, it's difficult to see the effects of any agreements that are in place. The new disclosures may also affect bond ratings and may also have political implications, as the agreements will be public information for the first time. As far as looking into the GASB standard itself, it was issued in August of 2015. This means that fiscal year 2016-17 will most likely be the first fiscal year this standard is implemented for. The primary purpose of the standard is to provide financial statement users information about certain limitations on the government's ability to raise resources, as abatements may hinder the actual collection of tax revenues that the government would otherwise be entitled to. It is important to note that the purpose of the statement is not to evaluate the effectiveness of these programs. It's simply to state the agreements that are actually in place. In the standard, there is guidance regarding the government's own abatement agreements, as well as abatement agreements entered into by other governments that affect the reporting government's tax collection. This means that your government may still be required to disclose information, even if it isn't the government that entered into the agreement to actually abate the tax. As far as the specifics go about the standard, GASB 77 has first a definition of tax abatement. As mentioned previously, a tax abatement is a reduction in tax revenues that results from an agreement between one or more governments and an individual or entity in which the tax revenues are reduced and in turn a specific action is performed by the participating entity. It is important to note that a transaction's substance, not form or title, is the key factor in deciding whether the transaction meets the definition of a tax abatement for the purpose of this statement. The disclosures must include a brief description of the program, including the names and purposes of the programs, the specific taxes being abated, and the authority under which the tax abatements are entered into, and finally, the criteria that makes the recipient eligible to receive a tax abatement. They should also include the gross dollar amount of the tax revenues that were reduced during the period being reported on. If there are other commitments made as part of the agreement, these must be disclosed as well. Governments are given the option to disclose these agreements individually or aggregated by type or program. One key factor to take into account is the government is not required to disclose all abatement agreements. Governments can develop a dollar threshold to determine if abatements should be disclosed. If this option is taken, the government must disclose the dollar threshold used. There might not be as much disclosures required to be presented due to legal reasons as well. If this is the case, the government must provide a description of the purpose of the abatement and the specific source of the legal prohibition as to why it cannot be disclosed. There are also less disclosure requirements for abatements affecting governments that were entered into by other governments that affect the reporting government's tax collection capability. For these agreements, disclosures should only include a brief description of the abatement and the gross dollar amount abated during the reporting period. So what now? The listed items are steps that your government can take to ensure it is ready to implement this new standard. The first thing is to review the GASB statement in order to identify the information that will need to be obtained and also determine if it even applies to your government. The next step is to review current agreements that affect your government. This may include reaching out to various departments within your government to ensure all of the agreements are reviewed. Once these are reviewed, it is time to determine the impact of these agreements to your government, which includes identifying the dollar amount of tax abated. Finally, develop a plan for no disclosures. Try and be as prepared as possible and identify these agreements prior to year end to know what information will be needed in the disclosures. GASB and other membership agency groups issue sample note disclosures to help with this process. Hopefully the last couple of minutes have been useful in assessing this new GASB standard and the potential impact on your government. Please feel free to reach out to me if there are any questions or concerns that I can help with during this implementation. Have a great day.